She was a disfigured bride left at the station, until a scarred cowboy called her beautiful. She was a disfigured bride left at the station, until a scarred cowboy called her beautiful. The train screeched against the rails as it came to a stop, coughing steam into the chilled air of late October. The station at Ironwood Junction wasn't much more than a stretch of cracked wooden platform and a sagging telegraph post, but for Eleanor Nora Hayes, it had once shimmered in her mind like a promise. She stepped down from the railcar with care, her gloved hands wrapped tightly around the handle of her worn carpetbag. Her heart pounded beneath the modest layers of her traveling dress, which she had pressed and rehemmed 3 times before the journey west. A second-hand hat with a velvet ribbon covered her dark auburn hair, and her face, her ruined face, was half shielded by a carefully pinned veil. She scanned the thinning crowd. Then she saw him. Charles Pennington, tall, trim, and dressed in a dark wool coat with gold embroidery at the cuffs. He dismounted from a chestnut horse and walked toward her with the deliberate confidence of a man used to deals, not surprises. Nora stepped forward and lifted her veil. His gait faltered. For a heartbeat, nothing moved, only the wind snapping at her skirt and the distant cry of a crow overhead. Then he spoke. "You lied," Charles said, his voice slicing through the air. "You didn't mention that." Nora's fingers fluttered toward the left side of her face, where the scar still burned across her cheek, pale and ragged, like a river carved through skin. "I told you I'd been in a fire." "You said minor injury," he snapped. "God, woman, you're—" He glanced around. A few townsfolk on the platform had paused their conversations. A freightman stopped moving crates. A child stared openly. "I'm not marrying a woman who looks like a goddamn nightmare," he said louder, for everyone to hear. "You gussied up your letters. You misled me." Nora's throat tightened. "Your words said beauty didn't matter. You said you wanted someone who could work beside you. Someone with a good mind." Charles let out a bark of a laugh and tossed a bouquet of crumpled wildflowers to the ground. "That was before I saw you." He turned toward his horse, hands already reaching for the reins. "Find someone else to pity you. I won't be tied to a freak." Her bag slipped from her hand and landed on the planks with a thud. Her mouth opened, but no sound came. Only her fingers moved, closing tightly around the last letter he had written, still folded and worn from reading, tucked into her pocket. The words blurred in her memory now. "I'm not looking for a beauty queen. The first I'm looking for someone real. Someone who can build a life with me." She had believed him. She had stitched every hem of her travel dress with trembling hope. Now she stood in front of a crowd that wouldn't meet her eyes, her shame laid bare beneath the lowering sky. Someone behind her whispered, "Poor thing." Nora bent and gathered her bag with shaking hands, the bouquet crushed under one booted foot. A breeze picked up, tugging her veil loose. She didn't bother to fix it. She walked toward the edge of the platform, far from the staring eyes and quiet gossip. Her boots clicked against the wood in a rhythm she could not slow. She found an empty bench near the freight shed and sat. Alone, frozen, humiliated. The sun dipped behind the hills, leaving streaks of orange and gray on the horizon. She watched the color drain from the sky and felt it drain from her too. Her heart thudded in a rhythm that hurt to hear. She had come west to begin again, but instead she had been left behind. Like a package returned unopened. Like a wound no one wanted to look at. And yet, even as tears threatened, she did not cry. Her hand, calloused from years of sewing, curled tighter around the letter in her pocket. It crinkled softly in the silence. Somewhere behind her, a bootstep echoed on the planks. She did not turn. Not yet. She had already learned what happened when you hoped. The last train whistle had long faded into the canyons when he spoke. "Miss Hayes?" Nora startled. The voice came from behind her, low, steady, touched by something neither pity nor hesitation. She turned, expecting another stranger's scorn, or maybe the station master telling her to move on. Instead, she saw a man in a dust-worn hat, a sheepskin coat slung over one shoulder. His face was lean and tanned, the right side shaded by the brim, but the left was marked by a burned scar, a jagged, pale patch that climbed up from his jaw to his cheekbone like lightning etched in flesh. She tensed. He held out something. Her hat. It had fallen without her noticing. He didn't toss it or drop it at her feet. He held it in both hands as if it mattered. "Figured you might want this," he said. She took it, slowly, her fingers brushing his gloved ones for a fraction of a second. Then she pulled it close like a shield. "You can leave it," she muttered, "and go about your day like everyone else." He didn't. Instead, he sat down at the far end of the bench, respectfully distant, not pressing, just there. The wind lifted the hem of his coat. Dust clung to his boots. "Luke Carter," he said after a long pause. "I run cattle about 5 miles west of here. Was in town picking up supplies when your train came through." Nora didn't answer. She kept her eyes forward. "I saw what that man said," Luke continued. "And I reckon I've seen jackals treat meat with more manners." Her throat tightened. "I don't need anyone to defend me," she said sharply. "Especially not someone pretending to understand." Luke let the words hang. Then, with a calm that made her chest ache, he turned his face toward her, full, unhidden. The scar on his jaw glinted in the last light of day. "Not pretending," he said simply. Nora blinked, unable to look away. The scar didn't make him grotesque. It made him real. There was something about his eyes, too, blue-gray like river ice, but warm at the center. She asked before she could stop herself. He nodded once. "Shiloh. And you think that makes us alike?" Her voice had a bitter edge. He shrugged. "No. Just means I know what it's like when folks stop seeing you and only see what's broken." Nora pulled her coat tighter around her. "You don't know me." "No, ma'am, I don't. That's why I'm offering this plane. I got a bunkhouse with heat, a clean bed, and stew on the fire. You can rest there a few nights, think on where you're heading next. No strings, no preaching. Just quiet." She turned fully then, ready to lash out, to tell him she didn't want charity, but something in his expression stopped her. He wasn't offering out of guilt or gallantry. He wasn't offering because she was a woman. He was offering because he knew what it meant to be cast aside. She studied him. The burned scar. The quiet strength. The fact that he hadn't said a single word about beauty or lies or pity. He just waited. Finally she spoke. "Why me?" He tipped his head. "Because everyone else looked away." Then, softer, almost like a question, almost like a truth. "Who says you're not beautiful?" Her breath caught. He stood, dusted off his gloves, and pointed west toward a waiting horse. "I'll ride slow. You follow if you choose." And with that, he walked away, not turning back, not pressing for an answer. She sat still for a moment longer. Then she reached for her bag, and stood. The bunkhouse smelled faintly of cedar and smoke. It was simple, one main room, one stone hearth, a narrow bed, a small table by the window. But it was warm, and clean, and quiet. Nora stood just inside the doorway, uncertain, her carpet bag still clutched in one hand like a lifeline. Her shoulders, rigid since the station, hadn't yet remembered how to lower themselves. Luke had already stepped away, giving her space. No instructions. No questions. Just the soft clink of tin as he stirred something on the stove. "You'll be warm here," he said over his shoulder. "That stew's mostly rabbit and beans. Not fancy, but it'll fill you." She nodded, stiffly. "Thank you." He didn't ask about the man at the train. Didn't ask about her past. Didn't ask if she had anywhere to go. Just ladled soup into a wooden bowl, set it gently on the table, and slid a tin cup of water beside it. "I'll eat later," he said. "You rest." Nora sat down slowly, her limbs heavy and unsure. The chair creaked beneath her, but it didn't collapse. She ate with small, cautious bites, as if someone might snatch the bowl away any moment. Across the room, Luke busied himself with kindling. That was when she noticed it, a small oval mirror on the dresser near the bed, draped in a cotton cloth, not hidden, just covered. Something in her chest twisted. He had thought of that. The stew was hot and earthy. It soothed more than her stomach. It grounded her, gave shape to her day. A place. A meal. A moment where no one was laughing, or staring, or turning away. The days that followed slipped into a rhythm so gentle it startled her. Each morning, Luke left before dawn to tend to the cattle. He returned by sundown, sometimes with kindling bundled in rope, sometimes humming softly under his breath. He did not ask how she spent her hours. He did not press into her silence. If she joined him for supper, he offered a smile and nothing more. And somehow, that was everything. She swept the floor with a makeshift broom and boiled water to wash her stockings. She patched a tear in the curtain, even though he hadn't mentioned it. She kept her scar turned from the fire. But Luke never looked away. He didn't flinch. Didn't pretend it wasn't there. One evening, after supper, she found him sitting on the porch steps sharpening a knife. The stars were beginning to press through the velvet sky, shy and distant. She stepped out, wrapped in her shawl, and sat beside him. "My father died when I was 16, she said suddenly, her voice barely above a murmur. Ma followed a year later. The fire came after. I was supposed to marry a man in Kansas, but when he saw me again, he couldn't bear it." Luke didn't respond right away. Just nodded once and kept the blade moving and steady, rhythmic strokes. "I thought maybe this time would be different," she added, quieter now. "But I think I was a fool for hoping." He set the knife down. "I married once," he said. "Before the war. She was small. Laughed like a spring creek. Died in the fever before I came home." Nora blinked. The ache in his voice was soft but unmissable. "I'm sorry," she said gently. He shrugged, but his jaw tightened. Some things never heal. Some just stop bleeding. The wind shifted. Somewhere out in the dark, a coyote howled. The sound seemed to pull something from her she didn't know she still carried. "I don't have anything left," she whispered, as if confessing to the night. "No home. No name worth saying. No face anyone can love." Luke looked at her then, not with pity, not with fear, but with something deep and anchored. "Then we start there," he said. She blinked, breath catching. "With nothing." "With that," he said. "With exactly that." And somehow she believed him. Not because he promised to fix her, but because he didn't try. He just stayed. The scar didn't disappear, but for the first time in years, it didn't feel like the only thing in the room. It was still there. And so was she. And now, so was he. The whispers came like smoke, thin at first, then thick enough to choke. Nora heard them at the trading post, in the way the older women paused mid-sentence when she stepped inside. She saw it in how the storekeep's wife lowered her eyes, or how one man nudged another and muttered behind a hand. She was the disfigured woman who had been left at the station. Now she was the disfigured woman living with a man. The townsfolk didn't need truth. They just needed a story. One morning, Nora sat by the window of the bunkhouse, watching Luke ride off toward the hills. Her fingers curled tightly around her mug. Heat rose, not from the tea, but from the shame she thought she had buried. By the time he returned near dusk, she had made up her mind. "I'll leave tomorrow," she said without preamble, setting her bag on the table as he walked in. "I appreciate everything you've done, but I will not be the reason they talk behind your back." Luke didn't look surprised. He only removed his gloves and set them down slowly. "They're already talking," he said. "Have been for days." She swallowed. "Then, all the more reason for me to go." He crossed the room and leaned against the hearth, arms folded. "I lived through Antietam. I've had lead in my ribs and fire in my lungs," he said. "But the hardest thing I've ever done is walk into a room and feel it hush just because I was in it." She looked away. "And still," he continued, "I walk in." Nora's throat tightened. "I can't be the reason you lose whatever peace you found here," she whispered. He stepped closer. "Then let me choose what peace looks like." That evening, against her protest, Luke took her into town. They walked side by side down Main Street, the sky above them burnished in gold. Every step brought silence from porches and gazes from windows. People stood frozen outside the saloon. The crowd inside quieted as the door creaked open. Luke didn't slow. He walked them to the very center of the room. Then he turned, took Nora's hand, and laced his fingers through hers. "She isn't hiding," he said, loud enough for all to hear. "If you can't bear to look, turn your damn head." Mouths parted. Someone cleared his throat. Someone else muttered a curse. But no one moved. And no one dared speak back. Luke tipped his hat to the bartender, nodded once to the piano man, and walked her back out the way they came, still holding her hand, never once letting go. Outside, the sky had turned lavender, the stars peeking out like secrets. They stopped in the shadow of the old blacksmith's shop. Nora's hand was still in his. "You didn't have to do that," she said softly. He looked at her, the scar on his jaw catching the last of the light. "I did." "Why? Why?" His voice came steady and low. "Because you're not something to be ashamed of." She blinked, heart stumbling. "I don't care what they say," he added. "But I do care what you believe." Nora didn't answer. She didn't need to. Not when her fingers tightened around his. Not when she finally let herself be seen, and didn't flinch when he saw her. The day had started like any other. Warm sun. Soft breeze. Dust curling behind wagons on Main Street. Nora had gone into town for flour. Luke offered to ride with her, but she waved him off with a smile. "I can face them," she said, and meant it. She was just stepping out of the mercantile when the past came walking up in scuffed boots and a desperate grin. Calvin Moran, her former fiancé. She knew him by the way his shoulders rolled, like he still believed the world owed him more than it gave. His coat was worn, his eyes bloodshot, and the stench of old whiskey clung to him like a second skin. "Well, I'll be," he said with a slow whistle, stopping in front of her. "Thought I saw a ghost, but no, it's just my runaway bride." Nora didn't move. "I didn't run," she said calmly. "You left." He gave a dry chuckle, That's so. Maybe. Things get muddy over time. Besides, I was young. Didn't know what I was getting into. His gaze swept across her face, pausing on the scar that cut from her temple to jaw. Still hard to look at, I'll admit. Shame, though. You were a pretty thing once. Before she could respond, another voice broke in. Still is. Luke. He stepped from the alley beside the saloon, arms folded, his eyes hard as river stones. Calvin raised a brow. And who's this? Your nursemaid? Or your charity case? Luke didn't flinch. He walked up and stood between them, calm and coiled. Still the same dog, he said, all bark, no backbone. Calvin's smile disappeared. His fist flew up, fast, clumsy. It caught Luke on the side of the mouth. Luke didn't move. He didn't hit back. Blood welled at the corner of his lip, but he only wiped it away with the back of his hand. You're not worth it, he said evenly. Calvin sneered. Maybe she's got you whipped, or maybe you like your women broken. Makes you feel like more of a man. That did it. Luke didn't swing yet. He turned to Nora first, and before the crowd gathering around them could even draw a breath, he leaned in and pressed a kiss to her scar. Gently. Deliberately. The hush that followed was immediate. Then, only then, did Luke turn back. The punch was clean. One hit. Calvin's knees buckled, his face snapping sideways as he collapsed into the dust. Nobody laughed. Nobody cheered. They just watched. Because it wasn't the punch that left them silent. It was the kiss. Luke looked down at Calvin, jaw tight. Next time, he said, stay gone. He turned and offered his hand to Nora. She took it without hesitation. They walked away together, back through the crowd, past the stunned faces and silent mouths. And not once did either of them look back. Back at the bunkhouse, Nora sat on the porch, her hands still trembling slightly from the adrenaline. Luke knelt beside the wash basin, dabbing his lip with a rag. You didn't have to do that, she said softly. He looked up. No, I didn't. Why did you? He was quiet a long moment, then stood and walked to her. You ever watch a man try to carve his initials in a living tree? He asked. She blinked. What? They think they're leaving something behind, something deep, but the tree doesn't stay still. It keeps growing, keeps healing. Sometimes it covers the whole mark like it never happened. He reached up and touched her cheek, not the scar, but the skin just beside it. You're still growing, he said. Still beautiful. No one carves their worth into you but you. She bit her lip, tears stinging. And for the first time since the fire, she believed him. The letter sat on the table, sealed with trembling hands. Nora packed in silence. Just the essentials, no more than a satchel's worth. She folded the dress Luke had given her, the one with the tiny embroidered flowers on the collar, and placed the shawl gently on top. The bunkhouse felt too still, as if the very walls were watching, waiting to ask why. But she could not stay. Not when every glance from a stranger felt like a judgment passed. Not when whispers curled behind their backs like smoke, curling under doors, slipping into every space between breath and silence. She would not be the weight that bent him. She would not be the scar he could not explain. She slipped out just before dawn, her boots crunching softly over frost. The letter was left on the table by the cold stove, its words pressed too tight to breathe. Her heart pounded not from fear but from ache. Past the corral, past the old cedar fence bleached by sun and time, into the stand of trees where the world quieted and morning birds had not yet begun their songs. By mid-morning she reached the stream. Wildflowers had begun to bloom along the banks, early blossoms with stubborn colors, yellows and blues and soft violet, pushing through the cold soil as if daring the world to stop them. She sat beside the water, arms wrapped around her knees, her eyes tracing the current. It whispered like a lullaby she did not deserve. She had wanted to disappear, but the world did not grant such wishes. She did not hear him coming. But she felt him before she saw him. Something in the stillness shifted, like the trees holding their breath. Luke stepped into view, his boots near silent on the wet grass. He held the letter in one hand, unopened. I did not read it, he said simply. Nora's heart seized. She blinked at him, her throat tight. I figured if you were gone, it didn't matter. And if I caught you, I'd rather hear it straight. She stood slowly. Her voice was rough, cold. You should not have followed me. I did. She turned from him. I was going to go quietly. You succeeded, he said, too well. The breeze stirred between them. The stream rushed on. Somewhere, a hawk cried across the hills. He stepped closer. If this is about guilt, if you're staying because you think I need fixing or pity, I don't want it. She spun toward him. Is that what you think of me? No, he said. But I don't know what to think. All I know is it damn near killed me to wake up and find you gone." Her voice cracked, the words raw. "I'm scared, Luke. I know. Not of you. Of me. Of the way people look at you now, like I've changed the kind of man they thought you were." Luke tilted his head, quiet. "What kind of man did they think I was?" She gave a broken laugh. "Someone who could have had any life. Any woman. Not." Her hand moved, almost involuntarily, to her cheek. Her fingers grazed the scar, the old path of fire and loss carved into skin. "I'm not what you're supposed to end up with." He was silent for a long breath. Then, quietly, "Do you know what I carried home from the war?" She looked up, startled by the sudden turn in his voice. "Not just scars. Guilt. Names I never said again. Nights I never slept through. I rode from place to place for years, never long enough for anything to take root." Then he looked at her, really looked. "You're the first reason I've had to stop." Nora's breath hitched, her eyes brimmed. "I didn't mean to make you choose," she whispered. "I did choose," he said. "I chose you the moment you didn't flinch from my scars." She stepped toward him. Her hand reached up, trembling, and settled over his chest, over the place where the worst of his scars ran, hidden beneath fabric and silence. "Then I stopped too," she said. "Right here." He covered her hand with his own. His touch was steady, grounding. They didn't speak again for a while. The stream moved beside them, gentle and unbothered. The wildflowers swayed, unconcerned with fear or memory. But inside them, something stopped moving. Because they were no longer running. They were no longer surviving. They were home. There were no flowers. No music, no altar, no pews lined with lace. No rows of curious onlookers or bells chiming from a steeple. But the earth was soft beneath their boots, and the sky stretched wide above them, blue as mercy, quiet as prayer. And that was enough. Luke stood beside Nora beneath the old cottonwood tree that shaded the edge of his pasture. Its bark was silvered with age, carved here and there by initials and storms. Its branches swayed above them like a slow benediction. Sunlight filtered through the leaves in golden shards, falling over their shoulders like a blessing. Will, the old innkeeper, stood across from them. He had combed his hair, buttoned his best shirt, though the cuffs were frayed and one button didn't match. He held a small leather-bound book in his hands, fingers curled protectively around the spine. "I reckon I'm not much for speeches," he said, clearing his throat. "But if love's what's binding this here thing together, well, I've seen baling wire hold less steady." Luke gave a quiet smile. Nora let out a breath she didn't realize she had been holding. Her hands were bare, her dress simple, ivory cotton with the sleeve she had hemmed herself by firelight. There was no veil, no jewelry, just the wind, the sun, and the man who made her believe in second chances. Then Luke reached into the inside pocket of his coat and pulled out a small folded square of white silk. Her breath caught. He unfolded it carefully, the fabric trembling between his fingers, and held it out to her. "It's yours," he said. "You left it behind." Nora stared, her eyes widening. It was the handkerchief. Her mother's stitching still visible in soft blue thread along the edge, initials curled like wildflowers. It was the only thing that had survived the fire. She had carried it in her pocket that day, tucked deep beneath her apron, and after the smoke had cleared and the ashes settled, it was gone. "I found it in the rubble," Luke said, voice gentle. "Kept it, hoping someday, maybe today." She reached for it with shaking fingers and pressed it to her chest. "I thought it was lost," she whispered. "So did I," Luke replied. "But not everything that burns is gone forever." Will sniffed once, coughed roughly, and looked away. They didn't exchange rings. There was no audience to clap, no orchestra to rise. They only had words and truth. And when Luke took her hands in his, rough palms calloused from years of work, he looked at her not like a man rescuing something broken, but like a man standing before something holy. "You were beautiful the first time I saw you," he said quietly. "And every day since you've only grown brighter." Nora didn't cry. Neither did Luke. But something inside her trembled, like a string pulled taut, like light breaking open inside a cave. She took a breath and answered with words that had waited too long to be spoken. "You made me believe that even what the world throws away can still be worthy of love." Will cleared his throat again, his voice rougher than before. "Well then," he muttered, "if I've ever seen a bride more right for a man, I surely don't recall it. You may not have pews or petals, but I'll tell you this, there's not a soul in this town who won't remember the day Luke Carter married a woman who looked like she was lit from within." Nora blushed, but didn't look away. Luke stepped forward and pressed his lips to her scarred cheek. Then her mouth. And nothing else mattered. Not the town, not the past, not the scars or silence or stares. Only this. The wind whispered through the cottonwood leaves, soft and sure. The sky did not need to cheer. The earth bore witness. And when they turned together and walked back toward the house, hand in hand, side by side, they didn't need a crowd. They had each other. And they had already won. By summer, the town had stopped whispering. The novelty wore off sometime between the day Nora began teaching reading in the old schoolhouse and the afternoon Luke hammered out a set of hinges for the general store's back door. Life, as it tends to do, settled into rhythm. Children with freckled cheeks and missing teeth sat in rows before her, mouthing out syllables with tongues too big for their mouths. Nora wore blue cotton dresses now and tucked pencils behind her ear. Her scar was always visible, she never bothered to hide it. No one asked about it anymore. Not even the little ones. They only knew that Mrs. Carter read better than anyone and brought wildflower honey in tiny jars on Fridays. Luke worked in a modest blacksmith's shed behind their home, the forge's glow often catching the edge of his face in the dusk. His scar still ran sharp along his jaw, but like hers, it had faded into something else entirely. Just one part of a man who fixed wagon wheels, shod horses, and tipped his hat to anyone with decency in their bones. People came. First for work. Then for advice. Then simply because they trusted him. Some even stayed to talk to Nora. Women who had once looked away now brought jam jars and seed packets. They spoke softly, kindly, as if it had taken time to realize she was not something to avoid but someone to admire. On Sunday evenings they sat together on the porch steps, Luke's hand around her waist, her head against his shoulder. They said little. They didn't need to. One evening, after the sun dipped low behind the ridge and the sky turned the color of ripe plums, Nora spoke. I used to dream of going back to that station. Luke looked down at her, but said nothing. Not to find him, she clarified. Not anymore. Just to stand where I stood and whisper to the version of me that was left behind. He reached for her hand. She smiled faintly. She wouldn't recognize me now. Luke pressed a kiss to her temple. She'd be proud. Nora looked toward the horizon, where the fields stretched endless and golden. A breeze tugged gently at her skirt. I was a bride someone walked away from, she said softly. Because of a scar. Because I didn't look the way love is supposed to look in fairy tales. She turned to Luke, eyes steady. But now, I'm a wife. Not because someone ignored my scars, but because someone saw every broken, burnt, frightened piece of me and still said, "You're mine." Her voice dropped, almost a whisper. And I'm his. The wind rustled the trees. A lantern flickered on the windowsill behind them. In town, someone's dog barked once, then went quiet again. Luke didn't speak. He just held her closer. Because everything she said was true. And because, in all his wandering, he'd never believed he'd get to keep something this good. Not until her. Not until now.